So I've been getting a ton of questions about making the jump to 1x drivetrains, and even more so lately since posting that video of upgrading my brother's bike to a 1x drivetrain, putting a different fork on it and everything. So I'm gonna bring the Crux, which I made the jump to 1x on like 3 or 4 years ago by like cobbling something together, and I think that's a good catalyst for getting us into the subject of 1x drivetrains and making the jump to it if you're thinking about it. Now, there are a bunch of different ways that you can make the jump to a 1x drivetrain on your bike, with some being more of a conversion than an upgrade, others being just a straight up upgrade, and then others that just kind of like fall in between those two spectrums. But before getting into those methods, I think it's worth having a lesson on chains, chain rings, and derailleurs before we get started. If this next part seems somewhat scripted, it's because it is. I'm reading from it right here that I wrote. Roll the B-roll. Bicycle chains can typically be categorized into two different widths, 1/8 and 3/32. This measurement has to do with the width of the rollers inside the chain and nothing to do with the outside width. A 1/8 chain's primary use is on single speeds, so we can pretty much just ignore them in this video. It's worth noting that all geared chains use 3/32 rollers, and only the outer width is dictated by the number of cogs on the cassette. So yes, a 7-speed chain is wider than an 11-speed chain, but only on the outside. They both use 3/32 rollers. This is important when we start to talk about chain rings. Pretty much every modern 1x drivetrain now all use narrow wide chain rings. The teeth are taller than double or triple chain rings, and each tooth alternates between narrow and wide. The narrow teeth fall between the inner plates, and the wide teeth fall between the outer plates of the chain, which holds the chain on more securely. Basically the opposite of what you're trying to achieve with a ramped double or triple chain ring, which are machined to help with smooth movement from one chain ring to another via the front derailleur pushing it off and on. All of these chain rings, narrow wide and double or triple, are all intended to be used with 3/32 chains. So even though some chain rings simply say compatible with 11-speed chains, any geared chain will fit and work. That is simply to say that a 8-speed chain and an 11-speed chain will act the same way on a narrow wide chain ring. You can also find 3/32 single-speed chain rings that will kind of offer very similar results, but they're actually a little more annoying to find, and I probably just shouldn't have brought it up at all. Now, derailleurs for use in modern 1x drivetrains have been equipped with two key pieces of tech: a one-way clutch of sorts and a stronger cage spring. The clutch acts as a barrier to resist forward movement of the cage, while freely allowing the spring to keep tension on the chain. The result is substantially less chain slap, which means the chain stays nestled in the teeth of the chain ring. That's how chain drop is virtually eliminated. Nothing is perfect. Unfortunately, clutch derailleurs only come in 10-speed compatibility and up, so if your bike is 9-speed or lower, you're sort of out of luck. But most newer and modern rear derailleurs use a strong enough cage spring to plausibly mimic the use of a clutch-style derailleur. So it's not all lost. You can still cobble something together like what I'm going to show you in this video. So with all that out of the way, let's nerd out on some 1x drivetrain stuff right now. First up is the most simple and ghetto way to convert your bike to 1x from whatever it is that it might have on it right now. And it doesn't get any simpler than simply removing the front derailleur cable and adjusting the front derailleur for it to be a chain guide for the chain ring that you want to be in. This typically involves lowering the derailleur and adjusting the limit screw to lock the derailleur in place. The derailleur will prevent chain drop the same way it would if it were still set up with a cable. As a bonus, if you can, remove the front shifter and the unused chain rings from the crankset if possible to clean things up a bunch like we did on this bike. Although for some bikes, especially the cheaper ones, this might not be possible with the integrated brake lever shifter system. You'll have to leave that on to have a front brake. And lower end cranksets typically don't have a bolted together chainring set, they have a riveted together one. If that's the case, you'd have to leave them all on. You'd be ultra ghetto. In fact, if that's the case and you have a riveted crankset and an integrated brake lever shifter setup, I'd recommend just leaving it as is. And to get an idea of what one by is like, shift it to the middle ring and then don't use it. That way you can see what one by is like without having to like pull stuff apart and make it look like a mess. That's just a quick pro tip. Tinkering's fun, but you don't want to like ruin anything. Now this method is certainly crude and does often yield quite a bit of chain rub and a lot of noise. But it is as cheap as you could possibly get for converting to a one by whatever drivetrain. You can do it to any bike with any level of drivetrain. In fact, it's exactly what I did to the fake TT bike before putting on a narrow wide. It's how Ian runs his gravel bike as a 1x11 campy setup. And it's how we quickly put together this one by drivetrain on Sean's commuter bike. Now, I don't think I would go anywhere near saying that this is an upgrade to a bike. It's more of a conversion, like a hacked together conversion to a one by drivetrain. Now, you're guaranteed to lose some of your gearing range by eliminating your front derailleur and your inner and outer chainring, or if you have a double, your outer or inner chainring without changing anything else. But you will be able to experience what one shifter is all about, and you can kind of get an idea of whether this one by world is for you or not. Second up gets a little more focused on putting together a bit more proper of a one by setup by buying specific parts, without going out and buying an entire full one by drivetrain. Keeping it simple at first, if you aren't super keen on using your existing derailleur as a chain guide, then you can go out and you can buy a specific chain guide, kind of like this one right here. You can get these from a bunch of different companies and they basically do the exact same thing as what a locked out derailleur does, it just looks a lot nicer. One of these is still a very decent way of converting to a one by drivetrain on a budget without having to take chain tension and rear derailleur types into too much consideration. Chain slap and the tendency for chains to want to slide off ramped chain rings should be relatively well dealt with one of these. Now, if you want to get away from chain guides and front derailleurs or anything in that area altogether, there's only really one way to go about doing that, and it is to go out and buy a narrow wide chainring. And even then, you should be reasonably careful with the spring tension in your rear derailleur. You should be reasonably safe against brutal chain slap with any newer mid-level rear derailleurs, but be wary against any derailleur that doesn't hold strong chain tension. If you're able to push the derailleur cage forward with too much ease, consider continuing to use a chain guard with the narrow wide to ensure the chain doesn't accidentally pop off the chainring in really bumpy situations. But for most mid-range equipped bikes, simply installing a narrow wide on should offer sufficient enough chain tension for reliable one by gravel, cyclocross, road riding without any unexpected chain drop. In fact, my TT bike is built exactly this way. It's got a non-clutch, 10-speed rival rear derailleur with a narrow-wide 50-tooth chainring with absolutely zero issues. My friend Joel's cross bike may as well be the exact same, only with an Easton narrow-wide at the crankset and a non-clutch Shimano 105 11-speed rear derailleur. Not one chain drop in any cross race in the last 2 seasons of racing. And then as a further example of a bike that we've done pretty much every step that I've said so far, Sean's commuter bike erased that front derailleur catcher in favor of a race face narrow wide paired with an older, worn down, non-clutch, 9-speed Alivio rear derailleur. No problems at all. Each of the bikes that I just explained all use different speed chains, but as I explained earlier, because they all use 3/32 roller widths, the compatibility with the narrow wide chain rings isn't a problem at all. Now I know what you're thinking, yes, things do get bumpier in the woods on the mountain bike, so a narrow wide chainring on its own can sometimes leave a little bit to be desired in the way of the chain retention department. So what I would say your best option is to pair that narrow wide with a chain guide if you're not really willing to make the jump up to 10-speed and up drivetrains to take advantage of those clutch style rear derailleurs. What I ended up having to do to convert from 3x9 to 1x10 on my bike was buying an X9 Type 2 rear derailleur, an X5 shifter, X1 crankset, a bottom bracket, a 10-speed cassette, and a 10-speed chain. It's hardly the cheapest route to go down just to take advantage of a clutch style rear derailleur. I actually did a very similar thing with the Crux. I replaced the 2x9 Sora drivetrain that was on it by buying Sram Apex road shifters, another X9 Type 2 rear derailleur, a race face narrow wide chainring, 10-speed cassette, and 10-speed chain. Thankfully, Sram road and mountain drivetrains both use one-to-one actuation pull, so you can mix and match their road and mountain group sets accordingly. Each of those bikes were built before budget-friendly 1x10 and 1x11 drivetrains were widely available, so I had to kind of cobble them together myself. But both of those bikes hold the chain on plenty tight and have never dropped a chain in normal riding conditions. Which is sort of as to be expected because they're just cobbled together versions of what all of the new modern 1x drivetrain offerings are. Which segues us nicely to the third way that you can upgrade to a 1x drivetrain, and it is the simplest and least explained in this video because it is simply go out and buy a 1x specific drivetrain. Sram offers them, Shimano offers them. The only thing that I would say that you need to be somewhat conscious of is whether or not your bike has wheels that are compatible with 11-speed. If they aren't 11-speed compatible, then an 11-speed cassette from either brand will not fit. So what you're going to want to do instead is order a 1x10 drivetrain like I did for my brother in this video. Somewhere here. That video does a pretty good job of how I took his bike from a 3x8 to a 1x10 by buying all the parts and not cobbling anything together. So if you're interested in that, watch it. This is easily the simplest and most upgradey route to take and kind of eliminates a lot of the tinkering. But I really like tinkering, so I don't really see any of the fun in it. There's not really much to explain. Buy the group set as a large group of parts, have it installed. Okay, all right. It's getting kind of late here at the store. It's past 7 o'clock. I'm getting hungry. It's dark out. It's super cold today. I feel like to consider continuing the year off right, and for how tedious a video like this is to shoot, it only makes sense that I treat myself to one of those big-ass burritos purely because, Graham, you mentioned it and you wanted to see one and I want to eat one. So that is how we're finishing this vlog off today. Big burrito trips mean ferry trips. Please like, comment, and subscribe and share this with your friends like all the other YouTube vloggers asks you to do.